My name is Lindsey Reilly, and I'm discussing John Morreall and Herbert J. Storing. John Morreall believes that it is unfair to only rule out physically violent civil disobedience. Many people assume violence is just a physical act injuring another person. Badeau claims that violence is deliberately destroying property, endangering life and limb, and inciting to riot. But violence is not only described as physically hurting someone or their property. There are other forms of violence as well, mainly psychological violence. Any act of violence can be described as when prima facie rights are taken away from a person, either by physical violence because everyone has a right to his or her body, or prima facie rights are taken away by physically or psychologically eliminating or diminishing his autonomy, as Morreall says on page 132. These prima facie rights are shown in the statement that everyone deserves life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Morreall says on page 133 that psychological violence is often far more damaging than mere physical violence. An example Morreall used to demonstrate this is the case of a young girl and her parents. The parents found out that their daughter spent a night with a married man, so they took her and her dog to a field and gave her a gun, telling her to kill and bury her pet dog. Instead of killing the dog, the teenage girl turned the gun on herself and shot and killed herself. These parents did not commit any physical violence on their daughter, but it is very clear that the psychological violence they caused was way more damaging. This is an example of covert violence. The violence by the parents is disguised because the teenage girl committed the physical violence on herself. Morreall is showing how damaging psychological violence can be. He believes that whichever means are being used to be civilly disobedient, it will in some way be a violent act. Civil disobedience is psychologically violent in any way it is performed. In Herbert Storing's The Case Against Civil Disobedience, he discusses many of Martin Luther King Jr.'s ideas. Martin Luther King says that one who breaks an unjust law must do so openly and lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty. Storing does not agree with this, saying on page 93, an open refusal to obey an unjust law shows the highest respect for a law in the same way that an open insult to a degraded woman with a willingness to be slapped with insult shows the highest respect for womanhood. To show respect for the law, one should follow the law as it is. Civil disobedience is not respecting the law. It is breaking the law, and a more appropriate way to protest is nonviolent revolution. Storing says there must be a conversation on whether or not the law is just or not, and also if society is just or not. It is only possible to openly and lovingly break the law in a just regime, and civil disobedience is irrelevant in an unjust regime. In the case of segregation and the civil rights movement, segregation laws were unjust, so it is not possible to break the law openly and lovingly. Morreall and Storing have very different views on civil disobedience. Morreall believes all civil disobedience is violent in its very nature, whereas Storing believes a nonviolent revolution is the best way to protest, and violence does not have a place in protest.